Hi everyone, this is Alan McKay and welcome to a bonus episode I've put together which is to do with studio pipelines and the Mango pipeline platform, so check this episode out.
Welcome to the Alan McKay Podcast. Alan is an Emmy Award-winning visual effects artist and mentor to many leading industry experts. Listen in as Alan talks with other industry leaders in film, video games, and visual effects about their experience, lessons, and methodology. Alan will teach you pivotal advice to fast-track your career, better your skills, and reach your ultimate dream job. Check out the latest episodes on alanmckay.com.
Hey everyone, this is Alan McKay and welcome to a bonus episode I've put together. Carlos Anguiano and I covered so much stuff when we were talking about the episode 2 and episode 4. So episode 2 was more about his career, about doing a lot of really cool stuff, and there's a lot of really insightful stories. And episode 4 was a lot more hands-on, being more about scripting and nerding out, and more about the benefits of being a technical director and also how to make more money by having some technical skills. There's a lot of really cool content in there. That being said, there was a lot of stuff I had to take out just because I hadn't seen Carlos in years and we had so much to go over. However, there was one area that I didn't want to leave out, and I think that it makes way more sense as a bonus to have this episode where we can kind of really focus on it. And that is that Carlos has developed his own studio pipeline platform, which he's now implemented into several really successful studios like Big Block and Mind Over Eye, who both do a lot of photoreal car commercials, very high-end commercials that require a lot of photorealistic lighting, rendering, effects, you name it. On top of that, Magnum Opus, Phenom, Encore Hollywood, who are one of the biggest TV commercial houses out there, who literally need to turn around entire shows within a week, literally days before they go to air. So they've got to do a lot of crazy stuff, very demanding. These are some of his clients. He's done a lot of phenomenal work, and this has been a really interesting talk just because even discussing Mango and what Mango is, the whole entire pipeline idea is so crucial because I think a lot of people don't appreciate and understand how beneficial and how impactful it can be to have a solid pipeline within your studio structure. So we go through a lot of really cool stuff. I'll let us just dive into it, but even if you don't work in visual effects, I think there's a lot you can benefit from understanding the machine. In other words, understanding a lot of how auto studios work and also a lot of the pitfalls of them. I think it's very insightful to go through this. So this is really exciting. I'm psyched to fit this in. Anyway, let's dive in and check it out. What is Mango, first of all?
Well, Mango is kind of an interesting sort of business venture that I'm getting involved with. It's also a really ambitious project that I'm starting. And it's basically a pipeline in a box, you know. And when I say that, you know, I understand that a lot of people that have intimate knowledge of pipeline are going to understand just how big of a claim that is. That's like a really tall claim because, you know, pipeline is a very broad topic that touches everything from the artist's life to, you know, the producer's life to the client to, you know, even HR, you know. So the way that I am basically designing this project, which to make it perfectly clear, it's a set of tools that we use to, you know, make work easier and cheaper and have more revisions, is that I'm creating this project in phases, right? So different phases are basically meant to build in a way where you start with the most basic building blocks, the stuff that you're really gonna need, and then figure out how these new building blocks can have an immediate impact on the overall production and the way in which we do business, and then in future phases continue to add to hopefully expand the umbrella of this pipeline project to then, you know, affect other parts of production to where eventually we've done so many phases that over time we've built a system, a set of tools that is pretty well integrated, and it's really sort of written with the idea of big picture in mind.
Eventually you'll have a studio in a box.
Exactly, and when I explain like the pipeline, like what Mango is, that's kind of an easy way to explain it. Is basically if I was to open up a studio today, how do I want my studio to be run? And I think there is a bit of a crisis in the mall studio in the way in which they've been approaching pipeline, because a lot of the ways in which people have answered that exact same question is being from production inward. right? So we've seen technologies like Shotgun and Shotgun Toolkit that are they're not the pipeline. A lot of people think that's the pipeline, but that's a small part of the pipeline, right? It's project management, and Shotgun Toolkit tries to open the door to like asset management, right? Tying Shotgun, the project management tool, to be able to track resources. So a lot of the times, this initiative tends to start from production inward, right? So it's very Shotgun centric. So it's basically, how do we just get everything fucking in Shotgun so that like me as a producer, as a supervisor, I don't want to talk to the artist, I don't want to face to face, I just want to be able to like, you know, in a perfect world, handle everything through this little website, right? And the problem that's created is that it's never taken the workflow into consideration, because a lot of this development is happening by people who are great at planning a project, but don't necessarily know how the content is created. They don't understand the nuts and bolts of like a render pass manager. They don't understand the nuts and bolts of like Nuke. They don't understand the nuts and bolts of like Max or Fume or RealFlow and all of the different technologies that we use to actually create that content. So the type of environment that's created is that it's created an environment in which the artist doesn't want to use those tools because the organization is done at the management level and it doesn't always fit his workflow, yet he is forced to constantly get his head out of his computer and stop doing work, which is like maybe running late on or has like a lot he has to get done, and then manually start entering like all these data into Shotgun just to make production happy, which in the long run, it just basically tends to not work. You know, because what happens is that when the artist needs to make a choice at like 12 at night between like submitting 15 shots that need to be reviewed tomorrow and entering data into something like Shotgun, the submitting to the render farm is going to win. You know what I mean? Like that's what he is going to do. And then eventually all of these things are going to break away. So currently, so I take a slightly different approach, right? Like my approach is like, let's start phase one from the workers out. So like, let's organize the way in which we do workflow. Let's bring standards and practices. Let's bring a common language that as artists we can all understand and start off of that. Like, let's organize and come up with like standardized ways to create the work at the artist level, because that brings order to what we do, and then producers and managers can then much easily track that work. That's, you know what I mean? Because you have a set way of doing things. You're no longer trying to create a system that can track any random thing. Like we're saying, our work is not random. Like, and I think you might agree with me, with as much experience as you have, that almost every aspect of our production nowadays can be standardized and automated. You know, I think that modeling, rigging, animation is definitely standardized. I mean, there's very little divergence in that. There's ways to do that work repeatedly and reuse it, you know? And same thing for, you know, creating 3D passes that go to comp and creating comps and creating EDLs and setting up a shot. So, but that's basically what Mango's doing, right? Like we're starting from the artist and we're moving ourselves outward to try to find the rest of the studio. So that's where phase one, which is the last finished phase of Mango, starts. So what phase one of Mango basically is all of the directory structure, versioning, and sort of tool integration into like Max, Nuke, and Maya to set what I call the generalist pipeline, right? The generalist pipeline being in a small studio where you have all generalists. The minimum thing that you're gonna need to do is you're gonna have to create work files and be able to track those. You're gonna have to bring stuff into these work files and work with them. And then you're gonna have to like render stuff out of these work files that somebody else is gonna have to pick up comp and then send to editing or send to review. Right? So those are the things that Mango Phase 1 basically focuses on, is let's get that asset tracking working and let's set our first workflow. How do we create work files across all the different applications that we use? And how do we render out of them? And how do we publish these renders? And how do we then do the handoff over to compositing so they can know that these elements exist, they can keep them up to date, we can have a running history of them, and we can remove like the manual process of like, oh shit, like I don't know, I didn't get the email, or you know, like it's saved but it's saved in the wrong place so I couldn't find it, and that type of stuff.
Do you find that you protect the artist by making him have to work within that workflow?
Yeah, I think so. So the idea is that like the tools themselves are not as important. What's important is the idea of standardizing our workflow, right? The idea that you say, like, we can't just have the artist save his work file wherever he wants.
I don't think artists should be allowed to save all load files, and it's not because artists can't be trusted. It's because it's
because they're gonna make errors, and you're under stress, and you're doing these things. So if I tell you this is the standard, and I don't give you a tool to help you do the standard in a very effortless way, the standard's not gonna hold up. Like, the standard could be phenomenal, but there's gonna be problems that are gonna, continue to go down the pipe because errors are going to be made because we're human. So that's, you're right, like that is what we're trying to do. We're trying to say really the important part of Mango is about coming together and generating standards and practices for like the way in which we create content.
That's right.
And then creating tools to help us apply those standards and practices so that they don't consume all of our time.
Yeah.
So hopefully the standards and practices are taken care of us, and we just go into the particular thing that we need to do and focus on actually creating those revisions, creating that artwork, and passing it down.
And, well, I'll just quickly say the benefit of that is that not only are you protecting them by saying you need to work within, essentially you will work more efficiently by allowing the system to do the work for you, but
exactly.
In return you actually end up saving so much time because you're not manually going in and saving's one thing, but then repathing your render, submitting your renders, and if all that,
and then the person down the road too, right?
Yeah,
because if the person down the road needs to go and find all of these things and manually bring them into his file, then there's another room for error.
But if there's always breadcrumbs, and even just stuff like, your system does do this as well, but like a lot of places, typically you manually, let's say you publish your hero pass or your latest published asset, you archive the old one. Studios like Blur and other places will do that manually. You save out old caches, versioning, all that stuff. By having a lot of that done for you, it means you're saving human error, which is one thing, which saves a fuckload of time when things go hairy. But on top of that, all the nitty gritty shit that you shouldn't need to do is done for you, which is a huge key thing to save time.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, just like you said, like Blur is still doing like manual archiving, but by setting all of this order and having tools that allow you to, it's like cooking, right? Like if you cook, you can make a mess. Like at the end of the day, our final product is like that meal. It could be delicious, but if after we eat, we have to clean up the entire kitchen and the kitchen's a fucking mess, then how much money that meal just cost us, right? Like it costs us our time as well. But the idea is that like the tools allow you to clean up as you cook, right? So the idea is that by the time we fucking like finished our dinner and we're ready to eat it, like everything is clean, right? In the case of backups and that type of stuff, it means that when the project is done, everything's organized so that like if we want to create like an archive utility, we don't have to clean up. Like we can already smartly know where everything is and like move it over.
Cooking show, and I love you. It's like, remember kids, clean up while you work,
Yeah, just throwing pepper and everything. Bam, motherfucker.
Stir that shit.
Yeah, that's right. So that's part of phase one, and the other part that's important about phase one is the idea that like once we created the content, like how do we review it, right? And so one of the big things that phase one does is that obviously there is a lot of code that's gone into working this. So part of it was creating this concept of tracking resources and separating resources by categories, so we could use these categories to describe the different pipeline steps. And also that meant creating like a versioning system and interfaces to be able to see this directly from the artist application, but also see it as standalone. And the other part is being to glue, to write the code to glue all of that to pre-existing technologies as well, right? So for example, I don't know how much experience you have with like Shotgun as a project management tool, but one huge sort of breakthrough that I really made with Shotgun was when I finally saw where all the paperwork was leading to, right? Which was using Screening Room. And you'd be surprised how many people are using Shotgun a lot, but they haven't been able to make that jump into using Screening Room, which is by far like the coolest, most awesome aspect of Shotgun.
And I'll just intervene real quick for two things I was going to bring up. Just real quick. One is that the biggest thing that Shotgun lacks in is, you're right, it's not an asset tracking software. It's more it's
project management.
Yeah.
Right?
So for instance, viewing videos, all that kind of shit, it can do it. It's a lot of fucking manual work to get your shit in there.
Yeah.
But even then, it's not fluid. It's very slow. You still learn.
Like the biggest complaint is that like if you're working on a commercial and you're working on a rapid turnaround, is that like I don't have the time to fucking set up Shotgun to do my show.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But as I said, at the same time, if you are able to see what Screening Room allows you to do, right? You say, I really wish I had the time to set up this project so I could use Screening Room. And for those that don't have much experience for Screening Room is basically like an application that can be run either as a web app in Shotgun, or it can actually be wrapped around RV, which is a really awesome frame cycler by Twig software.
Then you're using a real RAM player rather than opening up shit in like Windows Media Player.
Or like playing compressed QuickTimes in the Shotgun website, you know, which
so
don't give you proper color.
One thing I'm just going to quickly say, just because it's better to say it now than later, is that you got Mango and you got Shotgun. So when we talk about Mango and how great it is, the best thing is it actually will work beside Shotgun or anything else.
Yeah, and Shotgun is an optional thing, right?
Yeah.
But like, yeah, absolutely. And to wrap up the point that I was really trying to make is that idea of glue. Right, that like it's through the artist process, Mango can automatically set up most of the structures that you need to track everything, and it set up a standard, at least in phase one, of how we can easily create work files, how we can easily render these elements and publish them for comp and keep comp managed. But it also allows us to send stuff for review to dailies, and the main interface that it uses is that it glues to Shotgun, so that even if you haven't set up anything in Shotgun at all, it will automatically do all of the excuse me, it will automatically do all of the entries that Shotgun needs for you to be able to use Screening Room right off the bat. And that's why it's kind of important to know what Screening Room is. So like Screening Room is basically like a frame cycler application, but it allows you to view any version that you submit to it in a timeline fashion. So that means that instead of reviewing shot by shot, you can now actually view things in a sequential way and check stuff for continuity and maybe judge an entire sequence on its own, you know? It also is built directly into Shotgun, so that like when you are reviewing a particular version, and by version I mean like a frame sequence or a QuickTime, that you can actually draw on top of it, create notes, press apply, and have those notes go directly to your artist and become part of like the running history of either that task or that shot. So obviously like super useful to be able to I have something that's ready to show, Alan's got a million things that he's got to review, all I have to say is send this for review, and then next time you see it and you open Screening Room, you can see everything that's changed in the show that you're working on, and you can choose to view all the new versions and start making notes and drawing directly on the screen. It's a very fun, very interactive way to not just review work, but also do like dailies, right? So the cool thing is that like Mango glues these two technologies, but you don't have to use Shotgun at all, like you can, but Mango will create all of the Shotgun structure when you submit to be able to just open Screening Room and have all of that set for you. You know what I mean? So that's a lot of the glue that we're talking about. Also, we also glue with other technologies like Deadline, Draft. But the idea is that, you know, a lot of people see these technologies and say, you know, Deadline's great, but like, you know, maybe it doesn't do like plugin syncing for you. And so if you need to have different plugins depending on different jobs, you're gonna have to write something for that. So we glue that for you, right? Same thing, like if you need a way to get like Mango directly into Screening Room, like we have glue to glue Mango directly into Screening Room, so you can start using it from day one. If you need to use something like Draft to create QuickTimes or FFmpeg or all these other technologies, like it's all built into the workflow, you know, and obviously as we go into different phases, we extend it into other parts of the pipeline, you know? So it's a very ambitious project. Currently, I'm really happy to say that I have like 5 clients that are currently using it. So I have Big Block, which is a commercial shop here in Los Angeles, Mind Over Eye, which is a sort of television and broadcast place.
Both of those places kind of came from the mentality of Sway, which was, you know, in DD to car commercials and doing really stuff.
Absolutely. And Mind Over Eye is actually a broadcast company that was doing like a lot of frame of the editorial, and now they're moving to doing almost like their own channel, but at the same time, they have their own visual effects department, right? So that's where Mango's being used the most in that particular company. But then, so we have Big Block, we have Man Over Eye, we have a full sort of film production studio in Beijing called Thinum that also has its own visual effects studio that's doing that. We have a new company in Los Angeles called Magnopus that's using it, and they're a feature film company. And most recently, the latest client has been Encore Hollywood, which is a part of the bigger Deluxe Media that does a lot of television and episodic.
Encore is pretty much like the biggest in the world when it comes to TV stuff.
Like so basically, like if you've seen,
right now and every other big show.
Yeah, like if you think of like any amazing show that you've ever seen, like Tombstone or anything on HBO, The Sopranos, like that type of stuff. If there's a cool effect there, more than likely it was done with Encore. I mean, like Encore is definitely being the place that's been doing for like the last 20 years the best work visual effects in television, which by the way is the most fucking challenging kind of work you can do, because the turnaround will make your head spin. Like you will get a plate today, you will have to do some incredibly complex effect and literally deliver it the next day or 2 days from now. I mean, there is absolutely no time to breathe in that industry.
That's exactly my point I was going to bring up. And the benefit of that is to say that, like, they're working within your pipeline, and their shows are typically ones that you've got a couple of days to do an entire episodic from start to finish.
Yes.
So it isn't just about doing big feature films and big pipelines, but working rapid fire. And that's where mistakes are most likely going to be made.
Exactly.
And money can get wasted. So if you have a good solid pipeline, it means things stay on track and there isn't chance for shit to hit the fan or for you to waste a lot of money going down the wrong path.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I mean, just to give you a little bit background on sort of like what the main sort of idea behind Mango was, is that like, when we talked about niches right early on, we were talking about how like, how I feel that I've been really lucky because I've experienced, like the artist workflow and I know how to program. So I've been able to get this niche where I'm kind of like this technical artist that can program and can create these workflows. That also crosses over in like the conversation that we were having about being at the smaller studios and being at the big studios and really understanding the difference in needs that both studios have. And that's one of the big things that I always felt that like the big studios had. Not everything is great. Some of the stuff would slow down the smaller studios quite a lot and remove some of the freedom, but there's certain standards and practices that you could most definitely bring over that would just create a more efficient, still very fast and much more organized pipeline. So that's also one of the reasons why, like when I opened up phase one, as I said, as we talked before, my experience has always been like in characters and rigs and models and animation, but phase one wasn't gonna start in characters, rigs, modeling, and sort of like those micro publishing, because because we want Mango to be something that like a small studio can use, but we want to allow the studio to be elastic, right? Like the generalist pipeline allows people to very quickly create those, those work files, do everything that they need to do in the middle, hack things in whatever hack was to do without having to publish anywhere in between, and then render. The only part that we're going to make you publish is the part that you hand off to the next person. And same thing for Nuke. They're going to bring the stuff, do all the hacks that they need to do, and then publish it out to Mango. And that right there is something that a small company can use without necessarily being bottlenecked, right? Yeah. But if the next project that they get, all of a sudden the scope is a lot bigger and they have to do like a cinematic or they need to do models and all of a sudden they need to bring specialists and 40 people more, then phase two is going to integrate that macro stuff. And by the way, phase two, I'm hoping to release at the beginning of next year, but that's going to be like your model publish and your rig publish, more of like that big studio pipeline to be able to feed those lighters the elements that they need from other departments and, continue to keep them updated so that then they're just working on lighting and breaking their passes out. But the idea is that that's optional. So if the studio starts with, generalist pipeline and then that big project comes in and they start using some of the phase two tools, and after that project, they go back to being like 5 guys working in car commercials, you just don't use the phase two tools. So that's the idea, right? The idea is that like you want to have those tools from when the project gets bigger, but you don't necessarily need to use them all the time. Like Mango is not about being bloated. It's about looking at like what are the stages that we can improve, and then as you grow or your projects needs to grow, trying to have things there already for you.
You plug in the bits and pieces that you need where you need them.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing that I've seen this a lot working. We both worked at bigger studios and small studios, and one thing I've seen a lot is like you get small studios who want to do I'm gonna kill that cat. That want to do the bigger stuff. So they're like, okay, we're gonna hire our own developer, our own programmer or tech guy. But sometimes it's just a TD and expect them to do bigger things. And it's like, okay, now we have you go and make us a big film pipeline and make us ILM. And the thing is that one person and the experience they don't have isn't going to get them there. Yeah. And we were talking about this earlier about like, you have studios which like you rather than going and hiring a studio to go do the movie work for you, you're like, no, screw it, I'll do it all myself.
Yeah, I'll do it all myself.
This will save me all this money. But the thing is, then you've got all this overhead, the computers, the hardware, the artists that you've got full time.
And some of it you might not even account for because you don't even know how the product is made.
Exactly. So, and no experience behind it to actually manage the whole production. So you end up bleeding out and closing down your entire shop because you thought you could save money then going to a studio and doing it. Same thing here where you can go and hire a few developers. You won't be able to go get your ILM, but at the same time, there's an efficient way to do it, which is you go and let's say Mango or whatever your solution will be, you contact them and you say, okay, we want a customized solution for our production. So give us your bare bones, like phase one, let's say. From there, we need this, this, and this. Can we hire you? Pay the additional cost to get these things customized, implemented for our service.
So one of the experiences that I've had is like, you're right. Like when people hire programmers, one of the first things that happen is that you might hire somebody that's a very good programmer but doesn't have a lot of VFX experience. And a lot of the times, the people dictating like that big picture might be people who don't necessarily understand the product. So the programmer is just going to do what you tell them to do. So like if your idea is flawed or if your idea doesn't encompass the big picture, like it might be destined to fail, not necessarily because of the person you hired, but because maybe the wrong person is thinking of the big picture.
Right.
So the way that the business model really is trying to work with Mango is not necessarily this idea of like you buy the cheap part or like you buy like the one that sort of best fits your thing and the other ones are optional. It's more that you're basically paying for the initial deployment to get Mango, the training to get on the initial workflow, and then through the subscription process, which is basically how I fund the rest of this project, you have access to all of the new features that are going to be added. So the idea is that like as phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, phase 5 come on, like just by being the subscription, you have access to these things. So you're never going to necessarily have to pay like a premium for them, as long as you kind of stay in the, you stay in the subscription, But obviously there are going to be things that when we look at the Mango development roadmap, just like you said, there might be features that are like later, like down on the road that you need now. So at that point, that's where I bid like special projects, right? Mm-hmm. So what that means is that, like, for example, right now one of my clients is going to start a stereo project, and the stereo's already supported to the directory structure and through publishing, but it hasn't been fully extended to like Nuke and Maya, for example. The reason being that right now none of my clients are doing stereo, so that became something that we kind of put towards the end. But now I have this client that's going to start a stereo job, and that's very important to them. So basically, we bid a special project to get that done sooner, right? But the cool thing about that is that when people pay for special projects, since Mango's kind of like a communal project, when that stereo stuff is done, it's not unique to Beijing. All of a sudden, everybody else inherits that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a way to basically encourage people. And people might see it like, well, what if I develop this, then everybody else gets my work. But at the same time, if somebody else develops, you're getting it too.
Yeah.
So it's really like a mutual...
Stereo pipeline might benefit you now, but then when you get an IMAX movie 2 years from now, it's like, fuck.
Yeah, or maybe you're doing...
Yeah,
but maybe you're doing commercials. But the thing is that as a production studio, as anybody working in VFX, like when you find those niches that you can do quickly, you want to grow on them. You know what I mean? Like that's the problem. The problem is when you're bidding on stereo and you've never done stereo before and you don't have a stereo pipeline. But when you have a stereo pipeline that allows you to easily create that stereo work, bid on that fucking stereo work. Because at the end of the day, when people are fighting for work, when people are fighting for these like retardedly like low bids, being able to expand what your business does gives you more opportunities.
It's a really good point.
You know? Yeah, absolutely. And at the same time, like if you also look at it in a way of like, hey, you know, we want to expand our business to either go public or do any type of trade, that's how you make your business grow, by growing the type of work that you do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, today one of my clients might be a television client doing broadcast, and they might say, you know what, like I have no desire to have stereo, but once they have stereo, there's like an encouragement to say like, hey, if you have a producer that also happens to have like fucking rides being generated in China that are stereo, fuck it, let's do a ride, you know? And all of a sudden there's this new market that
now
you can tap into.
Confidence before you wouldn't, it'd be too much of a risk and you need to ramp up for it.
Yeah,
Now
you
it's
need to
like,
ramp
well,
up
we can
for it,
do
man.
Why not throw a few?
Because the idea is that like Mango is built under the belief that like pipeline for like content creation of what you do can be unified across all these different industries, right? Because at the end of the day, what we do in film, what we do in television, what we do in commercials, and what we do in like ride attractions, it's the same stuff over and over and over again. Like very few variables change, so let's just build those variables into it, you know? And on like, you know, and then the original question about, you know, like, you know, people hiring somebody else to do it, that's like the big difference to point out between like something like Mango and Shotgun Toolkit, where like with Mango, I'm focusing on giving you those answers, where like with the Shotgun Toolkit, you're kind of just getting shells, and then somebody's
like
telling
an SDK.
you,
It's kind of like, okay, now you can code, but you still got
like we have interfaces that kind of plug into Shotgun, and like that's already done for you so that you can register stuff, but now you figure out how you're gonna publish elements, now you figure out how you're gonna create stereo, now you figure out how you're gonna do all of these things. So then that means that like once again, now you have to use the cost of creating that stuff, and do you have the right vision? So a lot of the things that we're selling, that I'm trying to sell with Mango, is not so much like the software, but it's really like the idea of like unifying, and as a community of Mango users, really helping define those standards, you know, so that we have like really logical ways. And I've already gone out and obviously drawn out of these a lot of these standards through my experience, things that I've seen at ILM, and my experience in some smaller places like Pixelmondo and Scanline that are not ILM. But you know, how do we get these concepts worked across here? And that's a lot of what you're getting, right? You're getting like, you know, Mango plus, you know, like my 10 years of experience working in different pipelines and seeing, you know, how people do these collaborations, you know, and how they streamline them.
You've got a massive amount of experience, and that's a really good point, is the fact that, you've worked for the biggest, the best studios, and also both, let's say, as a character supervisor for Scanline, at ILM, at R&H, at all these different digital domain. You've gone to all the bigger studios, and at the same time, you've also gone to the smaller ones where their needs are typically going to be like, we need to turn shit out this week. We need to be production quality. We need to work within skeleton crew of people, but it also means that we typically will probably do things very ghetto because of this. And most people don't realize, like, they look at like the project got done, so therefore there's nothing wrong with what we did. It's not. Because it's hard to actually realize like how much more efficient and painless
and to add to that, I think that like at the smaller level, people have just accepted that production is supposed to be chaos. You know what I mean? That like that's just life. Like things are just chaotic. Like it's just, some people take pride. I mean, I remember talking to Tim Miller like back in the day, and he used to say like, "Oh, I don't know what these guys are talking about. Like the hour before delivery when nothing's done is when we do like our best work." But it's that kind of like that mentality is what keeps people from actually being able to think outside the box and think like, holy shit, there might actually be a way for us to organize ourselves. Like people just assume it's impossible, so why even try, you know? So, but the thing is that it is possible, you know, and sometimes all it takes is that you don't, like having somebody else give you an organization model that you can rely on versus trying to figure out one on yourself, especially when you're just dealing with chaos all the time.
And then customize it to what you need. And that's the thing too, is it's not like you're stuck in some workflow that someone else made and you have no control. It's more like this is set up in a way that is open and it's efficient for anyone.
I mean, it's mostly going to be open for like me as a Mango developer to continue to enhance it for all of the studios together. But essentially the idea is that all of the clients will be using the same pipeline, you know what I mean? That's like a business strategy for me, because the more that I can basically, like, if everybody's sort of using as similar of a pipeline as possible, and I don't have to sort of support all these different mutations, that means that, like, if something shows up in Beijing and I fix it there, that will never show up for, like, the new client, or that will never show up for the other clients that haven't reported.
And you've had that before too, where you've mentioned you've had guys that worked at one studio and they go to another studio, let's just say big block to Mind Over Eye, and it's like, oh sweet, you guys are using the Mango platform.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank God for that.
No, absolutely. And that was really cool actually, because that was something that actually I hadn't thought of, right? Which is like the relationship between, you're right, like talent sharing. Right? The idea that like now any of my clients can like exchange, you know, artists, and artists that have worked in Mango Pipeline come in knowing exactly what to do, being like, oh, I totally know this tool, I totally know how to submit my renders, I totally know how to build a comp, I totally know how to send stuff to be reviewed. And it's also kind of like another unthought factor that I didn't really realize until, you know, I was talking to, you know, like artists on the floor, that I was, you know, I was just like, hey, weren't you like a big block the other week? And they would be like, oh yeah, I am. You know, it's awesome to be able to, it's like I never left, like I just went into another place and it works exactly the same.
Walk into a different room.
Yeah, it's just like I just walked into a different room, you know, and that's something that I think could also be really excited, right? That, you know, that is a big waste of time, you know, because
it's typically about 2 to 3 weeks that people take to pick up a new pipeline.
And that's just it. And it's because our industry is young enough and it's so chaotic that like any other industry has standards and practices, right?
Yeah.
I know I keep mentioning that, but you know, you go to build a car, and whether you go to Chrysler or you go to Ford, there's very specific names that they share across that industry for the different stations and machines that they use to like build this car, the car building pipeline, right? Mm-hmm. And these people did that because it was the smart thing to do, because now they can work share, now they can have like a common lingo that the entire industry, you know, speaks, and they can together sort of like exchange engineers and ideas in a language that we can all understand,
so
right?
If you look at Project Runway, for instance.
Yeah, right,
So,
the ILM project that we talked about earlier, sure.
So ILM, if they were to, you know, want to push their pipeline, which didn't, in that case wasn't so successful.
Sure.
If you have other studios where it's like, okay, we have these massive projects, we're unmanned, we don't have enough bandwidth to take these on, we need to outsource to a couple other studios to get through what we're doing. Yeah. And it's like, fuck, if we do that, there's going to be all this asset sharing, it's not going to work. So it's like, okay, if everyone's consistently under the same pipeline, extending out to those other places, it isn't going to break what we're doing.
Right. And I mean, as a matter of fact, I have an interesting example of that that's happening right now. That is that Magnopus, my new client, is actually...
And that's Ben's company, right?
Yeah, Ben Grossman's company.
Alex Nice is going to be doing one of these pretty soon.
Oh, very cool, yeah. So hopefully he liked Mango too. Maybe you can ask him about it. And if he doesn't like it, you edit it out. But but they're outsourcing to one of my other clients, Phenom, right? And obviously that's as much as I can say, but that is kind of like the situation that you're talking about. So I do believe that like them having the same folder structure, they're, you know, working on the same project, using the same tools, is definitely going to be able to create that work share a lot easier. Right. The other thing that's also exciting about this project is by bringing this type of order, we can also do another type of workflow that's similar to that, that's recently becoming very popular, which is the idea of like same studio, different locations. Yes. Right? So I mean, that's something that people are still struggling to get that working. So that's one of the things that like we're already starting to brainstorm in Mango, like how do we do that, right? Because it shouldn't be that hard, because we currently have like an awesome versioning system that's all database driven, which means that as if we share the database with like another satellite office, they know everything that's been made, right? So then the idea is that like people in Max, people on Nook use these other tools to see what's available and bring it into their scene and connect it or update it. So that means that since we have controls over all of these different layers, there's absolutely no reason where like if it only lives in LA and I'm comping maybe like in New York, like I will know that the element exists. I will tell Nook to bring the element, and if it doesn't exist in New York, we start tying Aspera into it, have like an automatic queue, awesome. You know what I mean? And so that means that, you know, right now it's a pain in the ass because people are coming up with all of these ways to like, you know, package entire shows and try to get all these dependencies and like these very manual ways of like basically sending the work to another location, where through creating this type of workflow, we can already we already have all the interfaces in place where we can add more steps in the middle that could basically facilitate those kind of workflows as well, you know? So I'm not trying to say that's something that's available in Mango now,
No.
but that's something that's definitely planned in the roadmap, you know, which are like really exciting things that by developing phase one, already thinking about the idea of work sharing across satellites, we're already building with that end goal in mind. So even if you don't see it now, that's something that's already accounted for.
And that's where having studio experience comes in, because you understand the pipeline. For those who don't know, Aspera is a secure way to transfer files back and forth that's very fast.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically uses a different broadcasting protocol versus using TCP over IP, which is like what much FTP servers usually use. So yeah, it's super fast and it's supposed to be secure, and I believe it might even be NPA like approved, you know.
I was gonna say exactly that like J.J. Abrams, for instance, if you work with him, he's one of those people that will say you have to use the system because it's
and there's others that are secure as well, and Aspera is kind of like an expensive solution, but there's also like UFTP, which is like an open source project. So, but as I said, like that's some of the stuff that's exciting about this particular step, right? That like as we create the different phases, there's definitely like a roadmap already created, that sort of deals with like everything. But we choose an insertion point, and so that we choose strategically where do we need to start and grow out from that point out with everything else in mind, so that like our system, so that we don't run into those walls, so versus starting in production and moving inwards, not understanding what's happening there, we're trying to answer most of the bigger questions now, and for me, Comp and 3D, those are the easy parts because that's the stuff that I have the most experience with. But once you organize that particular part of the workflow, the files, the content that you're creating, then everything else becomes like so much easier. And the system is also easier to write because you don't have to, write code that's going to deal with all these like possibilities, all these options. You're setting a standard, which is the important part about how this is going to work. And obviously I do a lot of that stuff. I a lot of it is my own experience that I bring to the table, and a lot of it is also talking to my clients, and my clients do come up and ask sometimes for very specific things. But as a Mango client, I take what they say as a consideration, and then I look at the big picture of Mango and see where is the best place to fit this. Is this something that's already in the roadmap? If it's something already in the roadmap, then it's, like I try to show the client when it's coming, and if he needs it sooner, then time to do a special project, If it's something that's not on the roadmap, then I go and I do the homework and I say, okay, how does this fit into the roadmap? Like I am going to be responsible for those big questions, and having that conversation with the studio to not just have anybody throw a bunch of features. I'm sure that's probably something you've experienced before in Pipeline, where something started like a really great tool, but then people just started asking for all of these crazy options, and before you knew it, it just became this Frankenstein thing that didn't really quite do anything well. Well, that's part of maintaining Mango, right? Is that you need mediators with that experience to be able to say, that's a great idea, let's do that, but maybe let's rethink it. And let's rethink it as a community, and let's think about how it best works in the big picture of Pipeline, and like how does it extend to all of the different things that we do, That's
cool. And
that's the consulting part of Mango as a Mango client, right? That you're basically getting software, you're getting this consulting, which is the standards and practices, and just constant, communication. Absolutely. And then there's the training part, which is like once you have Mango, once I've basically told you sort of like all the big plans and all the ideas and everything that's going, actually being on site, helping your artists learn everything so that they can get a jump start on these new workflows immediately,
That's right, man. And a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap it up. But what's the typical process from initially, like, okay, we want to get Mango in here. I mentioned this earlier before we started, but like, I think some people, their first thoughts might be like, okay, this is going to be like a really long process with downtime, and it's going to mean that we're going to have to reinvent the entire wheel that is our studio. But like, how much work would it be from initially saying, okay, today we want to get Mango, how how long would it take to get up and running?
So like the initial deployment, which is basically getting the code into your studio, doing all the configuration, pointing it to whatever drive structures you have and all of that stuff, takes less than a day. So getting the code, getting it up and running, it's pretty fast. There's extra time that might be taken because one of the things that Mango does is also all of that plugin management on the user machine, like plugins for Max, Maya, Nuke, and that type of stuff. It handles it like on the user machine, and it also handles it on the farm, which means depending on like how many plugins you use, there might be extra time added to basically create all of the different network modules so that you can load your plugins dynamically versus just having to push installs all the time, which we know is troublesome. Because if you have down machines, if like the connection's not good, like it might not install properly, it's a big pain in the ass, and nobody wants to manually install, like the latest version of Fume into 400 rendered nodes, right? So that's a big part of something that you get right out of the box with phase one of Mango.
In a way is going to pay for itself, just because if you look at IT having to do, let's say, 400 nodes manually. I mean, 400 is ridiculous. You wouldn't, because it's going to take you weeks to do that. But even if you're like, okay, I've got a fancy render farm with 20 machines, installing software the old-fashioned way, that's going to be a day of work.
It sucks. Nobody wants to do that.
If you have a couple IT people, it's still probably going to be a day of work.
Whereas you can have one person just basically put that, create that Mango plugin module and put it on the network, and then have the software launcher on profile system do all the installation, and then that's already glued to Deadline. So when Deadline picks up the job, it knows what plugins it needs. So then it runs the software launcher. Then now that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about gluing those technologies to be able to automate things, that process, which is a sucky process.
And you look at, okay, that's like one task of a few, and suddenly there's like all these other tasks that do pop up over time that IT or other people have to manually go and do. And each time they do it, sucks up a lot of time, a lot of downtime. And just by thinking big and thinking, okay, well, what if I put in a bit of time, I invest a bit of time and money into something that is actually going to allow, us to cut out a lot of this waste, cut the fat by doing things the correct way. The amount of time and money you save from that, like in the long run.
And that's some of what we were talking about, like when you say like it's a pipeline in a box, it's a tall order, because pipeline is not just content creation. Like pipeline is, as I said, IT, HR. So this is like an example in which Mango helps your IT department be better. Right, because it's one less thing that they have to do, and now they can focus on other bigger problems, right? So most definitely, that's probably a good example of like this idea of crossover when we talk about pipeline.
Your producers actually get a better perspective on the whole production, and it's not the producer gets a better idea of what's going on when the artists do what they were meant to do and check things in and do everything correctly.
Exactly.
For me, I like Shotgun because I think that it's the first tool. Like I think I talked to you about this a few weeks ago about there's been Alien Brain and all these other pieces of software that come along that have tried.
Well, SharePoint I think is probably like the closest one, right?
And again, we both use SharePoint, and like SharePoint I really liked, but it required that you had full-time developers on site. If you didn't have that, then it just is pointless. You know what I mean?
Which is really what's brilliant about like the sort of history of Shotgun development. That like when you think about it, creating project management for visual effects is not that hard. It's not like creating project management for like constructing a building, because you have so many different tasks, raw elements, payroll, like all these stuff that you have to track. A lot of that stuff is actually simpler for visual effects because we're basically always dealing with the same things. We're just dealing with project sequence shot and tasks, you know what I mean? Right. So that particular part is not necessarily what's impressive about Shotgun. That's like relatively easy to do. But really what's really impressive about Shotgun is really like all these Web 2.0 concepts that have been put on this interface so that like when you open up that database and you're seeing the information, you can create your own pages showing information that's relevant to you and in your own way. And it's all like drag and drop and add a field and do this
that's the cool
no
thing.
Programming.
That's the cool thing, but also it's a double-edged sword because like it's really cool how flexible Shotgun is. The other thing is because it is so customizable, typically every studio you go to, you're like, oh, no shotgun, and it's like,
some
no,
crazy shit. Yeah.
You do pick some other shotgun, or you.
But but that goes down to my point that like shotgun is not about setting up standards, right?
Yeah,
like shotgun's about giving you a tool that does all this amazing stuff so that you can figure out the standards.
Exactly. And for me, like the one beef I had with shotgun, which is going to be for anything else too, I like shotgun for the fact that it is it's the most widely supported tool, so therefore it's made that win of being a pretty studio standard thing. But for me, if I'm like heavy in production and like Destiny and a few other shows, I mean, I'm one of those guys, I've got a bit of leverage because I'm doing a lot. I can kind of be a bit of a dick, but I will, if I have like a producer or a coordinator usually bugging me saying like, you need to check stuff in, if I'm busy, I'm gonna pretty much go to the producer and say, I'm too busy to check stuff in. So that coordinator has been like a bit of a dick recently. They're now assigned to check my stuff in for me because I'm too busy. And I've done that on at least 2 shows now, where it's just, you get someone annoying me enough, I'm gonna make them.
You're gonna make them do it, like, because you make it sound like it's so easy and like I'm just being lazy. Like I'm gonna put you through the process so you can experience the pain.
And here's where, and again, I'm not trying to make this into a big infomercial about Mango, but I do. Like the more, like when you showed it to me recently, and I've been following for a while, but when you showed it to me, it was for me, especially when you go shotgun, because like what shotgun lacks, it does so well. It's like for me, the amount of time I could have spent, and again, that's because I'm doing things fast, but the amount of time I could have spent checking shit into shotgun, I could have put out several more elements. For me to stop my flow, and like when I'm in panic, like not panic mode, but like the last week of production, as Tim Miller was saying too, I mean, you're turning shit out. Like I will probably be doing 36 elements or something a day, and for me to stop and have to go and check stuff in.
And put a comment and do a checkbox and then like do like a handoff status.
It ends up being like 10 minutes per element. And shotgun, again, like it does the job, but it's still a little bit fucking annoying.
And it's gonna be different at every studio too. So like you're right, like Pixelmondo was one way, like if you go to like DD's another way.
Could be a completely different interface.
And so like every single time you're dealing with like, and maybe one way had a really elegant way to do it and the other one was completely dog shit. And then you find out that like you were doing all that stuff and there wasn't even anything on the other side of the pipeline that even used that. So it was just a giant waste of time.
I experienced that recently too, where they had shotgun, but it's more they had shotgun. It was more.
But the producers just want to see it, but it has actually no relevance on the actual workflow.
It ended up being just like a status thing about like what's the status of everything, and they didn't take full advantage of it. But that's the thing too, is like I literally have to stop what I'm doing and go and manually set the shit up. Like typically I have like a bunch of spreadsheets open, I'm copying and pasting, and that for me, just because I'm doing so much, like I need that just to mentally be like, where the fuck
am I?
But to have something that you can set up to talk to shotgun, because for me that's what really excited me, was you've got these 2 packages that will fit together, and then you bring in screen room as well. That is like the 3 that just fucking makes.
And the whole work on the Marco as an artist on the Mango workflow, it connected everything without you ever having to open shotgun and enter and anything.
You can submit your render and have it
automatically.
When you submit your render, say, okay, now it's rendering.
Now it's rendering, like put a comment like,
hey. And ScreenFlow and Screen Room. ScreenFlow is a Mac app. Screen Room, and if you like your shit, I mean, you can basically say
now it's ready to be
submit for review, and then they can go in there and say approved. You know what I mean?
Or they can draw on it and say like this particular like corner is too sharp, like. And fucking work on it some more.
You never need to go into shotgun, but the beauty is that the people who do need to use shotgun, aka the producers, the coordinators, they can go in there and they can see everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's about it, right? It's about like, how do we...
Shotgun becomes the tool it needs to be. It's a database that, that...
And the thing is like for people who don't want to use a shotgun, like it's important to note that shotgun is purely being used as a project management and review tool.
Not an asset tool.
Not an asset tracker. So for example, like if you liked shotgun, if you didn't like shotgun, but you were looking at Toolkit just as a way to like create your directory structure and like do your versioning for you and do that type of stuff, but you don't want to build that, you can technically use Mango and never use any of the shotgun features, So, and the other thing that's neat about that is that as new technology comes on, there's already like 2 or 3 competitors to Shotgun, and now with the Autodesk Shotgun acquisition, it could be possible that a few years from now, like Autodesk either discontinues it or develops it in a way that like the current crowd that's using it is not happy about it anymore.
Yep.
So other emerging technologies might come through. So your entire pipeline is not built on Shotgun as a database. You know what I mean? It kind of separates that work so that like if a better screening tool, a better project management tool comes on, we build that into Mango as an option.
That's right.
If
your pipeline in terms of your asset and review is working, in other words, okay, we're using Screen Room, that's working really well for review. We're using Mango, and that's working really well
for assets. Yeah.
But then we decide we want to switch, or we get acquired, or Project Runway from ILM comes back and they say we need you to use our system. Whatever it may be, you aren't like, fuck, this is going to mean we're starting from scratch. It means you take that module out and you plug in the new one and continue working.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It gives longevity to your investment. And that's the biggest thing is that, like, for instance, I was at Blur, and, the big battle was, especially on the show, what we're just doing is like, we're all saying, why don't we use Nuke? And they're so heavily invested in Fusion that, they just don't want to do it because it's like, well,
they just have a history of it.
Yeah.
Like, they just know it.
Yeah, but, I think at this point, like, Fusion isn't on a
they need to
level.
move on to Nuke. I mean, to be honest, like, Nuke is just like revolutionized the way we work on, I mean, it's an industry standard.
But because of that, it's like, okay, well, we're invested in this, and if we were to switch, we're going to lose our investment. In this case, it's like, okay, well, if we were to switch, we can swap out the bit that isn't working and continue working. Or let's say Screen Room wasn't, there's something better came along. Great, well, we can swap that out.
And that's a great point, actually, that you make, because since Mango comes with very specific applications that run within the interface, the idea is that, like, okay, right now we're talking about Nuke being an industry standard, and that's going to have certain, like, artist tools. Like, it's going to have a workspace manager for people to be able to create their work files. It's going to have Comp Central, which is a way to see, everything that's available for comp and compare it to your comp so that you can say, hey, this is out of date, automatically update it. And then we have Element Publish, which is a tool that allows you to basically set your output paths for rendering, stuff out of comp back into the pipeline,
That's awesome.
But the cool thing is that, like, right now that's a standard Nuke. But 2 weeks from now, a new application might come out called, Super Compositor 2045.
Oh, I heard about that.
Yeah, it's a Mango product. No, I'm just kidding. No, but like, let's say like some other new compositing app that's all the rage. The cool thing about Mango is that all of the applications that run within apps are basically floating apps that just that can run on any application that have Python and PySide. So if this new application has Python and PySide, in a matter of days, we can extend all of the exact same workflow. We can have that workspace manager running. We can have the publishing running. We can have Element Publish also working on that, and Comp Central. And so that makes it really exciting, because that means that, like, right now I'm working on integrating a Hero, and obviously that has Python and PySide, so I don't need to write a workspace manager for it. I don't need to write a publish tool for it. I just need to write like I just need to write the connection between the two, which is a much faster process.
So Maya and Nuke, everything pretty much becomes a widget at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. And like, because at the end of the day, just like you say, like if a new compositing tool comes along, it still needs to do the same things. And you need to be able to save a work file or a project file, and then you need to be able to publish the rendered outputs, and everything in between is trivial, but it's those tools that are like the ones that can float between applications. So right now I'm looking, it's kind of funny because the workspace manager tool, for example, right now runs on Maya, Nuke, and Hero, and it's the exact same application to create your work files that runs on all three tools. And hopefully I'll be able to get it running in Houdini pretty soon too. And so same thing with Element Publish. Like, Element Publish allows you to publish either render elements out of Maya back into the Mango pipeline, and obviously it has like deadline integration to be able to batch those out, or it allows you to publish write nodes in Nuke. So technically Element Publish could probably also work in Houdini, because as I understand it, and I can be wrong because I'm not like a Houdini user, but Houdini has a similar paradigm for their passes where they basically have output nodes. So now we're talking about like the exact same code, the same interface, just floating around these things, and we just write the connections, which means that we can extend new software very fast, as long as it meets those two criteria. So that's kind of exciting because at any point, like as a Mango user, you might be able to just have like an XSI pipeline or a ZBrush pipeline or some other application pipeline that as soon as a new version comes out, like you can start using that immediately with the same standards and practices you've been using all the way across. And like if I add one new feature to something like the Workspace Manager or Element Publish or something like that, it's immediately available across all of the applications versus, having to have somebody that writes that in like that specific feature into each application, So it's definitely exciting because the idea is that the pipeline should be kind of like software independent, and being that like Python and PySide are becoming such standards, that's really what that allows us to do. It allows us to create that type of programming environment where we can like just write the pipeline almost outside of the software itself, so that if you want to change the software, you can change the software without necessarily having to recreate the pipeline,
It's awesome, man. It's really
it's really exciting for me. As I said, obviously it's a really big project. It's very ambitious, but I think that hopefully it will change the way that small studios think about work a little bit,
It's cool. I honestly could ask you 1,000 more questions.
Yeah,
I'm tempted, but it's nearly 1 a.m. No, this is awesome. Like, I honestly want to do another session just because, there's 12 more questions even.
Yeah, well, this has been a lot of fun for me, man. So, like, just anytime you want to do it, just let me know,
Well, I'll come to Texas and we'll...
yeah, absolutely.
This has been awesome, man. Well, thanks again.
Yeah, no problem, man. My pleasure.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. Obviously, we've covered a lot of content over these 3 episodes, and I hope that I've milked him for every single bit of information that I can, because Carlos is such a very insightful, very talented guy. So having access to him, there was so much content that I wanted to cover. So it's been really great. And this episode as well has been very powerful, both to look at Mango, but also to discuss studio pipelines and a lot of the benefits. We definitely get a lot more technical in these episodes, which has been really cool. That being said, I hope you enjoy this. You can check out his website at losart3d.com or LOSART3D.com. Lastly, you can check out the episode notes, or they'll be up very soon. alanmckay.com/LOS for all the show notes and everything else. Also, Digital Tutors was kind enough to give me a bonus free tutorial on RealFlow scripting, which is up there too. So that's something I put together for them a while back, but I think it's quite appropriate for this talk, which is about doing Python scripting and being able to script fluids with RealFlow. So that's going to be free if you click the link on the show notes. So that's it for now. Thanks again, guys, for listening. I'll talk to you soon.